Awab, come here. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, we've taken, I think this is our lesson number 5, the 5th one. The first day we had 3 lectures, in the morning we had 1, and this is our 5th one bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Now, and we're going to have a 6th one as well, inshallah, and then the 7th one is left. Now, the book, if you remember, is split into how many parts? 7. We've taken the first 2 parts, which is to do with the meaning of knowledge and it being divided into beneficial and non-beneficial. And then we took the different sciences which are sometimes beneficial and sometimes non-beneficial. And those sciences were 4. Firstly, to do with lineage. The number 2, to do with the stars. Number 3, the Arabic language. And number 4, mathematics. And we talked about how they could sometimes be beneficial and sometimes be non-beneficial. Now we're going to start and move on to the 3rd part of the book, which is to do with those sciences which have been innovated in the religion. Those sciences which have been innovated in the religion. Meaning that these are sciences not known by the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. That in of itself shows how evil these sciences are and how much corruption they cause and that they are from the paths of shaitan. And it causes a person to busy themselves with this, thinking that it is knowledge and turning away from the reality of beneficial knowledge, the beneficial knowledge pertaining to the Quran and Sunnah with the understanding of the Salaf of this Ummah with the explanation that we gave previously. And also, in some of the narrations that were mentioned just before the end of the section pertaining to the sciences which are sometimes beneficial, sometimes not, and also now with some of these innovated sciences, the author, he also clarifies something with the number of narrations that he brings. Because remember, one of the distinguishing factors of Ibn Rajab rahimahullah is that he was very knowledgeable and gave a lot of importance to the narrations of the Salaf. So you can see in this book, even if we might not read every single section, we might, or if you read it in your own time, or even the ones that we may choose to talk about, you'll see he mentions narrations of Salaf after Salaf after Salaf and after Salaf. And one of the things that he does talk about over here is how did the Salaf deal with these types of sciences. How did the Salaf deal with these types of sciences? Especially the ones which are innovated, or even the ones which can have parts of good, but once it goes past the boundary of beneficial and starts becoming non-beneficial or harmful, how did they deal with those types of sciences? And the general answer can be summarized into 2. And how did the Salaf deal with these types of innovated sciences? It can be summarized into 2. The first is al-imsaku anil khawdi fihi. Give me a copy of the book as well, the English book. Jazakallah khair. So they would refrain from speaking about it. Anything. Jazakallah khair. You keep yours, just give me a new one. Okay. Anything which the Sahaba and the Tabi'een did not know of, if that came to them, then the first thing that they would do is that they would remain silent about it and not delve into it. And this is aslun mashhur, a famous principle, a foundational principle according to many of the Salaf. Many of the Imams have specifically mentioned this principle, which is that delving into these types of innovated sciences, and we're going to see some of them bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, jazakallah khair. So this is the issue of trying to organize everything at the same time. Sometimes the books get left everywhere. Jazakallah khair. You guys can't see, but the stairs on that side are very, very steep. And I think in the last 10 minutes I've run up and down them like 10 times. And I'm out of breath. That's my exercise for the day. Now, so why did they remain silent? Because when a person delves into them, more harm comes out of it than actually good. Why? Because it goes back to bid'ah. It's innovation. كل بدعة ضلالة. All of it is misguidance. There's no good in any form of innovation. There's a statement of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, and this particular statement is a statement to show this principle, but it's also a statement that every student of knowledge should take as a methodology as well. Hence why specifically, this one is going to be mentioned. Imam Ahmad, he said, إِيَّاكَ أَن تَتَكَلَّمَ فِي مَسْأَلَةٍ لَيْسَ لَكَ فِيهَا إِمَامٍ. Beware of ever speaking about an issue where you do not have an imam with you in that issue. Beware of ever speaking about an issue where you do not have an imam with you in that issue. Meaning, if you come up, an issue comes to you and you come to a conclusion, don't dare take that conclusion and act upon it yourself or inform others of it as like a fatwa, unless some imam before you has said that. And a fiqh issue, as long as one imam from Ahlul Sunnah has said it, at least that way, there's some sort of safeness that you would have. But if nobody before you has said it, and you're the first one saying it, then beware of that. And this is a principle, whether it's in aqeedah, whether it's in fiqh, whether it's in any science that comes. And therefore, even here, this is how the Salaf were. If an issue came to them, which was not known by the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba or the Salaf, then they would not respond to that person. That is the first way that they would deal with it. There was a second way as well, another way that they will deal with that, with these types of questions and these types of issues, which is to deter the person from it by being strict with him. To deter the person from it by being strict with him. And here, there are many examples. So for example, Umar radiallahu anhu, in his time there was a person called Sabigh ibn Usl. Sabigh, Saad ba ya ghain, Sabigh ibn Usl. And he was a man, what he would do is that he would get certain ayat with other ayat and try to cause problems between the ayat. So what did Umar radiallahu anhu do? Umar radiallahu anhu كان يضربه بالدر. He used to hit him with a stick. That's Umar radiallahu anhu, right? He used to hit him with a stick and he was very severe and he would punish him. And the ulama, they say, إِنَّهُ صَلُحَ حَالُهُ بَعْدَ ذَلك. That after Umar radiallahu anhu dealt with him, he became better, he became rectified. And also another example of this is the famous story of Imam Malik. When in a lesson Imam Malik was speaking about Ar-Rahmanu ala arsh istawa, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rose above the throne. And a man said to him, كيف استوى? How did Allah rise above the throne? And I'm sure you've all heard of this narration. And we know that in the names and attributes of Allah, we don't ask how. The Sahaba never asked how, the Tabi'een never asked how. So this was a question which was not known to the likes of Imam Malik and the people at that time. Because innovation, it wasn't there before. So Imam Malik looked down. He started to sweat. He looked up and then he said his famous words where he said, Al-istiwa'u ma'lum, that the meaning of istiwa, rising above the throne, is known. And in the Arabic language, everyone knows what it means. Wal-kayfu majhul, but how Allah did it is unknown. Because the Prophet ﷺ didn't mention it in the Sunnah, nor did Allah explain it in the Quran. فَالْإِيمَانُ بِهِ wajib. So therefore, believing in it is obligatory because it's in the Quran and Sunnah. وَالسُّؤَالُ عَنْهُ بِدَعَةٌ. But asking about it is an innovation. And what did Imam Malik do with that person? Kicked him out of the masjid. He kicked him out of the masjid. So these are two ways of the Salaf how they would deal with it. Either they would just completely ignore it and not give any attention to it, or they would deter that person by disciplining him and being strict with him. It would depend on the maslahah and the mafsada, which one would give more benefit, which one would cause more harm. So depending on that, you would choose which of the two avenues to take. So now back to the book itself. The next part of the book is regarding the al-ulum al-mustahdatha, the innovated or the newly invented sciences. And in here, the Shaykh mentions 5 sciences. Remember, I did mention them quickly in the intro. The first is delving into al-qadr with falsehood. The second is delving into the sifat of Allah with falsehood. The third is the principles made by the fuqaha to refute or to reject the Quran and Sunnah. Number 4, knowledge of debating or argumentation without doing it in its correct manner. And number 5, at-tasawwuf. Even though at-tasawwuf, after the 4th one, the Shaykh talks about some other stuff, but eventually he comes back to tasawwuf and he mentions it as well. So now let's start reading the first one. What page are we on in the English? 33. Now.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم اغفر لنا وشيخنا والمسلمين الأجمعين قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى discussing al-qadr. From amongst these sciences are those innovated by the Mu'tazila in the discussion of qadr and setting up analogies for Allah, while a clear prohibition has been mentioned against delving into qadr. Ibn Haban and Hakim Hakim recorded the hadith of Ibn Abbas that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "This nation shall always remain steadfast and balanced so long they do not discuss the final destination of children and the divine decree."
So the first one that he mentions is al-qadr. Now, if you read, please read the paragraph before that as well. So that's like an introduction to it.
قال مؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, as for those sciences that were innovated after the time of the companions, those proponents claim that they were true knowledge and that whoever is not aware of them is either an ignoramus or misguided. All of them are innovations are to be counted amongst the newly invented affairs that have been prohibited.
So this paragraph that we just read here, this is like an introduction before mentioning the individual innovative sciences. And what the author, rahimahullah, is alluding to over here is the reason why they deviated in these issues. And it comes back to 2 things. The first is ignorance, and the second is oppression. First is ignorance, and the second is oppression. Why ignorance? Because they're ignorant of all of the narrations that prevent us from delving into these issues with falsehood. And we're going to give an example of that shortly, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And the second is oppression. Why? What's oppression? Oppression is when you place something in its incorrect place. So what they have done is that with these issues, because they're from ilm al-ghayb, they're from the unseen, there's no way that your aql can enter into it. The principle when it comes to ilm al-ghayb is at-taslim, you just have to surrender to whatever the text say. But what they will do is that they would give preference and precedence to their own intellect over the texts, and therefore causing them to either negate the texts or reinterpret the texts or distort the texts or liken Allah to the creation and other than that. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says regarding man in the ayah we recited in Surah Al-Isha, إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. The man is ظلوم, extremely oppressive, and jahula, extremely ignorant. So now, after that introduction, that this is the reason why they deviated in these chapters, he mentions the first one, which is al-qadr. As you can see, he mentions the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ says, "This nation shall always remain steadfast and balanced, so long as they do not discuss of children and the divine decree." Naam. And this hadith, some ulama have graded it hasan and some ulama have graded it sahih. So as you can see here, the first innovated science is the science of al-qadr. The science of al-qadr. And subhanallah, you can see here that the Prophet ﷺ clearly, what does he say? He prohibited from discussing divine decree. So the Prophet ﷺ, he told us to not delve too much into the divine decree. And another hadith where he said, إِذَا ذُكِرَ الْقَدْرِ فَأَمْسِكُوا. If qadr is mentioned, فَأَمْسِكُوا, then refrain from speaking about it. Now, to help you understand that, okay, what does that mean? When do we speak about it? When do we not speak about it? Then the texts in the Quran and Sunnah regarding Al-Qadr are of three types. The texts in the Quran and Sunnah are of three types, depending on the texts in the Quran and Sunnah are three types regarding Al-Qadr. Now, the first, those texts talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those texts talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second is those texts talking about the slave. And the third, those texts which prohibit us from delving into Al-Qadr. So any ayah or hadith that you see about Qadr, it'll come into one of these three types. Either it's about Allah, or it's about the Prophet ﷺ, first is about Allah, or the second is that it's about the slaves, and the third is that it prevents us from delving into Al-Qadr. So those texts which are regarding Allah are basically, in summary, the four levels of Al-Qadr, which I'm sure those who have studied Qadr before, right? You know the four levels: Al-Ilm, that Allah has knowledge of everything, and number two, Al-Kitabah, Allah has written everything. Number three, Al-Mashi'ah, everything happens in this world is by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number four, Allah created everything, right? So these are those texts regarding Allah. The second are those texts regarding the creation. And in summary, what that basically means is that those texts, what it tells us that even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything and has decreed everything, at the same time, the slave has a irada, has his own intent, his own will, and own ability to do what he wants. And there's no contradiction between the will of Allah and the will of the creation. So we still have to strive to do the best actions that we can. And that's what the Sahaba, they asked the Prophet ﷺ that if everything's written, why do we need to try? And the Prophet ﷺ said, اعملوا فكل ميسر لما خلق له. Do the actions, because everybody, the actions will make easy for that person for whatever he's been created for. Meaning, if you just say, okay, Qadr is written, so I'm not going to do anything, and you do nothing, and you don't worship Allah, and you're going to be punished for that, that's your fault for sitting down and not doing anything, right? You have to get up and do it. And if you try and you're sincere, Allah will make it easy for you to enter into paradise, right? So the point being is that you have to act upon it. Now the third type of text regarding Al-Qadr is this: preventing us from delving into issues of Al-Qadr. And there's many hadith. For example, the Prophet said, وَإِذَا ذُكِرَ الْقَدْرُ فَأَمْسِكُوا. If Qadr is mentioned, then refrain from talking about it. Likewise, the narration we just mentioned, and there's other narrations as well. Now, what does it mean, delving into Al-Qadr with falsehood? What that means is that if a person delves into Al-Qadr, learning what the texts say and what they mean for his own guidance, such as the four levels, and studying it when we studied it in Hadith Jibreel with the pillars of Iman, that's fine, because that's what's obligatory upon you to know. However, if a person does so for other than that, then that's why he's blameworthy. Okay, what comes under things which is other than that? For example, a person may try to learn Al-Qadr to do i'tirad against the Qadr, to try to speak against the Qadr. The why has Allah done this and not like this? And trying to question Allah, for example. That's not allowed. Or for example, a person speaks about the Qadr of Allah without any knowledge. Yes, Allah did this because of this. How do you know? Right? Or a person, he wants to try to make sense of the Qadr with his own intellect. Right? And so on. All of these types of things. Or he'll get some ayat regarding Qadr and other ayat and say, oh, look, this is problematic, and spread that amongst the people and so on. All of that would come into delving into Qadr with falsehood. And the reason being is because, as it comes in some narrations, it's mentioned that Qadr is sirrullahi fi khalqih, the secret of Allah in His creation. And it's something which the knowledge of it is with Allah. There's no way that a human who is deficient in his knowledge is able to comprehend the divine knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And furthermore, people always want to question Allah. Why did Allah do this and that? And the question is, who are you to question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If anything, as Allah says, لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. That Allah is not going to be asked about what He did. Rather, what's going to happen Yawm al-Qiyamah? We're going to be asked about our actions. That's what you need to worry about. Don't worry about Allah's actions. Worry about your own actions. Na'am. Surah Anbiya on the third page. I don't know what ayah number. No. So that, and when it comes to Qadr, whatever has been narrated and we have to believe in, we have to, we learn that, no problem, because it's obligatory. But in anything other than that, we don't delve into it. So some people may come to you with questions and this and that. And the reality is you won't be able to answer every single question all the time. Right? Why? Because you can't, it's a sirr of Allah, a secret of Allah. You can give general answers, right? And make people understand and so on. But it's the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's obligatory upon us in umurul ghaib, in matters of the unseen, is at-taslim, to surrender. Because this is the test. A Muslim, Islam means to al-istislamu lillah bi-tawheed, to surrender to Allah, to submit to Allah with tawheed. So this is your test. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow the wisdom of something to be apparent, so that we can ponder over it and benefit from it from that angle. But sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not make the wisdom apparent to test us. Will we still submit to Him or not? And that's what the test. That's what the test is. Why is Dhuhr 4 raka'at and Maghrib 3? Allah, we don't know. Right? But do we pray? The question is, do we still pray? Right? There will be some people who will come and argue with you. You ask them, do you pray? Do you pray Fajr? It's too difficult. What's this guy on about? About 2 rakat, 4 rakats and issues. You don't pray Salah. Right? So this comes back to beneficial knowledge and what we were talking about in the morning. That taqdeemul aham fal aham. Always give preference to that which is the most important and that which is beneficial. And then that which is most beneficial after that. And things like this we have been commanded to stay away from. And generally, just to help a person in issues of al-qadr, there are 3 main principles that if a person keeps these 3 principles in mind, it will allow al-qadr to become easier for him. The first is to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-alim, all knowledgeable. And you are going through, let's say, trial and tribulation, and you may think there's no way out of it whatsoever. The first thing that you remember is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-alim. Allah is all knowledgeable. He knows everything that you are going through. He knows what had happened to you before, what's happening to you now even better than you do, what's going to happen, and what would have happened if something else happened, and a different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows all of that. He knows what you're going through. And then number 2, remember that Allah is al-Hakim. Allah is all wise. Meaning that everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees, there is always benefit and wisdom in it. Even if it may look like subjectively there is some harm, the benefit objectively, without any doubt, is much more. So you believe now, whatever you are going through, there's wisdom behind it, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number 3, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-adil. Allah is just. Inna Allah la yadhlimu mithqala dharra. Allah, not even an atom's amount or a mustard seed amount or an ant's amount, does Allah ever oppress anything. وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. And your Lord does not oppress anyone. So whatever you are going through is from the pure justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Just like Yawm al-Qiyamah, if you do a sin, even if it's a major sin, you're under the will of Allah, right? So if Allah decides to punish you, that's from the justice of Allah, because you did the sin. But Allah can also decide to forgive you, and that's extra, that's from the pure mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if a person, remember these 3 principles, it makes it easier for him. And these 3 principles are mentioned by Shaykh Abdul Hamid al-Husari, Hafidhahullah. Now, carry on from the bottom of the page. Now.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, the prohibition of delving into the divine decree encompasses a number of matters. Number 1, using parts of the book to contradict.
Is that bottom of 34 now? Okay.
Using parts of the book to contradict other parts, such as the one who affirms the divine decree quotes a particular verse, while the other one denies it, quote another verse, and they start quarreling. It is reported that such an event happened during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whereupon he became angry and prohibited it.
Now, so person, he told them off, "Ma lakum tadribuna." Now, what's wrong with you throwing one ayah with the other ayah? Right? Meaning, throwing these ayat and causing issues, and now you're arguing over it. Right? So this is one of the types of, and Ibn Rajab is mentioning different types of delving into qadr, which is not permissible now.
Such matters are to be considered as disputing about the Quran, and it has been prohibited. Number 2, discussing the divine decree either by affirmation or negation, by rationalizing or employing logical arguments. This is exemplified by the saying of the Qadariyah, where Allah to decree everything and then punish people, he would be unjust and oppressive. And the saying of the diametric people, opposite, Allah has coerced the servants into performing their actions and their likes. And number 3, delving into the workings of the divine decree, the prohibition of which has been reported by Ali and others amongst the Salaf. This is because the servants will never be able to understand its true reality.
Now, on page 36. Now, read it.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, discussing the lot of Allah.
The that of Allah, the essence of Allah, but this title is not from the author as we explained in the morning. This is from the publisher, he's added it in. Now this section here is quite long to read, so I'll just summarize it for you, which is that this is regarding delving into the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With what? With aql. Meaning, learning the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one of the best actions that a person can do. Right? It is a means of getting closer to Allah. As we discussed in our introduction, the more you learn about Allah, the more love you have for Allah, the more fear you have for Allah, and so on. And it's also a means of making dua to Allah. وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. Belonging to Allah, the most beautiful names, so make dua to Allah using those names. It's also a means of entering into Jannah. The Prophet said that Allah has 99 names, and whoever does ihsa of those 99 names, ihsa meaning understands them, memorizes them, and acts in accordance to them, dakhala al-Jannah, he will enter into paradise. So, without a doubt, studying Asma wa Sifat is one of the best actions that a person can do, the best sciences that he can study. As Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said, al-ilmu al-a'la, al-ilmu bil-a'la. The highest knowledge is the knowledge of the highest. Al-ilmu al-a'la, al-ilmu bil-a'la. The highest knowledge is knowledge of the highest. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, excuse me for 2 minutes, inshallah. But that was your break, so you're not going to get a break now. Huh? No. Right, was that saying something, or what were we doing? No, nothing. I was saying that I was going to test all of you and make you all stand up if you can't answer. We don't have time for that. Normally, those that don't attend my lessons, that's what I should do, by the way. There's been times, brothers know, there's been times I've walked in the lesson, I've tested on the previous lesson, they can't answer, I just walk out. There was a video. Some of you who were following the classes were asking where's the video gone for that lesson. That video was literally, the lesson was 2 minutes. Said, brothers, just delete the video. Right. Now. Some teachers, Shaykh Haytham Sarhan will do that. I remember Shaykh Haytham, he, one time with me, I can't remember which book it was, his book in Aqidah, and he tested me. And I knew the answer. But sometimes obviously you're translating in your mind, so I just stuttered a little bit. He looked at me, he's like, Ta'al bukra, come tomorrow. Maybe, I can't remember which book it was. But the benefit was, he engraved the book in us. I remember that Usul Thalatha, that summer I came back to the UK, I was still a student. I taught all of Usul Thalatha from memory, didn't need a single book. Right? Ever for the whole explanation, because the Shaykh engraved it into us. Right? He didn't even let us stutter. So, now we're talking about the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying how it's one of the best sciences to focus on, but it becomes a problem now when you enter your aql into it. And that causes you to reject parts of it. So, why do Ahlul Bid'ah reject or do those 4 things where they distort and change the meaning and liken Allah to the creation? Why? It's because of the aql. There's many things in there. Those who have studied books with me in this masjid so far, we've not gone into the details of why. Maybe in Wasitiyah or something, we go into the details, right? But they have so many principles, right? And for different types of sifat, they have different answers, right? So for example, I'll just give some easy ones like the Jahmiyyah. The Jahmiyyah, what do? They completely negate all names and attributes for Allah. Allah is not Rahman. This is literally what they say. Allah is not Rahman, not Rahim, not this, not that. Allah doesn't hear. Allah doesn't this. Allah doesn't have a place. Allah doesn't. All they do is negate. And that's what the ulama call them kuffar. Why? What's left? Nothing. They don't worship anything. Why do they do that? They say because, or if we affirm it, like if we affirm a hand and a face for Allah, that means we're likening Allah to the creation. Right? So they use their intellect. And that's like a simple example, but then there's more. So for example, they will negate the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sifatul rida, for example, that Allah is pleased. When we say radiyallahu anhum, that Allah be pleased with the Sahaba, they negate Allah can't be pleased. Why? For Allah to be pleased, that shows emotion, and emotion changes, And that's for the creation, and that's not befitting for Allah. That's not befitting for Allah. So therefore, rida doesn't mean rida. It doesn't mean pleasure. It means, radiallahu anhum, yani Allah will reward them. So you see how they're using the aql now. Okay, well, any hadith backing up, any sahabi said that, any tabi'i said that, there's nothing. So, and then the different madhab have different reasons. The Ash'ari will do certain things, the Mu'tazila will affirm certain things, and they themselves have beef, right? And so on. So it gets really messy, okay, when you enter your aql. Whereas, if you just stick to the text, then not only is what you're believing correct, it's easier. Yani Allah says, radiyallahu anhum, and khalas. Na'am. Everyone has different aql, and hence that's why they differ. For example, there's a nice principle. The ulama, they mention, they say, كل معطل مشبه وكل مشبه معطل. Everyone that does ta'atil, negation, does tashbih, likens Allah to the creation, and everyone who likens Allah to the creation does tashbih, negates as well. Meaning, the mu'attila who negate, why are they negating? Because they're running away from likening Allah to the creation. But the reality is, that's what they've fallen into as well. And likewise, those that liken Allah to the creation, they also negate as well. How? So those that negate and say Allah is not this and not that, right? They're doing that because they don't want to liken Allah to the creation. So they negate. But what have they done? So what they do is that the first thing that comes to their head, Allah has a hand, they liken Allah to the creation. That's what they do themselves. So they say, that can't happen, so therefore we need to negate it. But then when they've negated it, they've likened Allah to nothing.
So they affirmed it and then negated it.
They say, look, Allah doesn't hear. Right? But the reality is, if they keep negating, then there's nothing left. So they've likened Allah to nothing. Right? Like some of the scholars would say, that if you say you have a sofa at home, right? Or a couch for the Americans, Abu Musab and so on, right? If somebody says to you, right, describe it to me, and you say, it's not big, it's not small, it's not got a color, it's not got wheels, it's not got this, it's not in the house, it's not. In the end, class, you don't have a sofa. You have, right? So that's exactly what they've fallen into. And likewise, the opposite as well. Those that fall into tashbih, who liken Allah to the creation, and they say, we can't negate it. It's an ayah in the Quran, we can't negate it, therefore we affirm it. Right? What they've done is that they've negated the correct meaning. They've negated all those ayat talking about it. They've negated the other ayat, the general ones where Allah says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, there's nothing like him, and so on. So subhanAllah, whenever you go away from the methodology of the Salaf, you always fall into more issues and more contradictions. But if you follow the way of the Salaf, then that is as-sirat al-mustaqim. Now, the author speaks quite a bit about this, and he mentions that there are two types of people. The people of the two, mainly, in summary, if you want to summarize the different groups, you have Ahlul Ta'atil, those that negate, and Ahlul Tamthil, those that liken Allah to the creation. And then we have those in the middle who are Ahlul Sunnah, who affirm that which Allah has affirmed in the Quran and Sunnah, and negate which Allah has negated in the Quran and Sunnah, without distorting the meaning, without asking how, without likening Allah to the creation, and without asking how. So that's the section on Al-Asma wa Sifat, which you can read in your own time. And subhanAllah, another point as well, if you look at the bottom of page 37, and that middle paragraph, the last sentence, those who should be followed are the Imams of Islam, such as Imam Mubarak, Malik, Thawri, Awza'i, Shafi'i, Ahmad, Ishaq, Abu Ubaid, and the likes. Yani subhanAllah, this is one thing you'll always find with the Aqeedah of Madhab al-Salaf. Yani they'll mention something, and then they'll mention the names of the Salaf who took that opinion. Ahlul Bid'ah can't do that. They can't mention the names of the Salaf, right? Because they're not following them. Now, let's move on to the next part, which is page 38, the rationalization of the people of opinion. No.
Al-Mu'allif rahimahullah ta'ala, the rationalization of the people of opinion. From amongst the innovated sciences is that which has been introduced by the legal jurists belonging to the people of opinion, compromising rational principles and rules which govern the legal rules and regulation, not caring whether they conform to the Sunnah or oppose it. The root basis of these principles may be well based upon interpretations of the text of the book and the Sunnah. However, others oppose the interpretations employed. This was what the Imams of Islam rejected when they refuted the legal jurists among the people of opinion in Hijaz and in Iraq. Indeed, they went to great lengths in censuring and refuting them. As for the Imams and legal jurists among Ahlul Hadith, they follow they followed any authentic hadith, provided that the hadith was acted upon by the companions and those who came after them, or at least by some of them.
Now, this is the third innovated science, which is not from the methodology of the Salaf, which is having dawabit and qawa'id, principles, which you bring fiqh back to, but these principles are innovated and therefore leading to a person rejecting the correct understanding of the Quran and Sunnah. So you'll find some people, right, and you will find this even sometimes in the usul of sometimes the Hanafi madhab, or some of even Ahl al-Bid'ah from them, the Ash'ari Maturidiyya, because it overlaps sometimes. But they will place principles, the principle in of itself goes against the Quran and Sunnah. And it goes against how the Salaf understood these texts. For example, they would say in their books, right? I'm not going to mention each individual one, but generally they would say, look, any ayah or hadith, and the Imams have literally written this, any ayah or hadith that goes against what our Imam said, then know that it is either mansukh, abrogated, or the apparent meaning is not intended. In other words, right, they have what the Imam said, then an ayah comes and it says the opposite. Instead of looking at the ayah and seeing what's the correct understanding of the ayah and trying to apply it and try to follow that straight away, right, there's a problem with this. We need to, okay, the Imam's right. So in their head, the Imam's always right. Now they have to do something with this just so it corresponds to what the Imam said. That's the problem. Okay, it's not a problem. Ayah comes, it could be abrogated, and the hadith could be abrogated. It could be the case sometimes, especially in fiqh, where the apparent meaning is not intended, and there's exceptions. It could be the case. But the issue now is that the asl is not the Quran and Sunnah for them. What's the asl for them? Qawl al-Shaykh, whatever the Shaykh said. And that is even in that's the. If you study usul al-fiqh is what? How to derive rulings, the methodology in how to derive rulings and understand texts. In usul al-fiqh, right, there are two main madhabs in usul al-fiqh, right? You have, the first one is called Tariqatul Mutakallimin. The Tariqa of Mutakallimin is also known as Tariqatul Shafi'iyah, the path of the Shafi'iyah, and it's also known as Tariqatul Al-Jumhur. Okay? It's got different names, and there's reasons for the names, we don't want to go into them. But this basically includes the methodology of Imam Ahmad, the Hanabila, the Shafi'i, and the Malikiyah. On the other side, you have something called Tariqatul Hanafiyah, or Tariqatul Fuqaha, the path of the Hanafiyah, the path of the Fuqaha. So as you can see, already in Usul al-Fiqh there are two main madrasas. These three and the Hanafis. Okay? Now, you got a question?
So is that the distinction of hadith and ahad?
Ask me after I finish the explanation. But na'am, yes, in simple terms it can be as well. Ahl al-Hadith, Ahl al-Ra'i, na'am. What is this? Now obviously these three madhahib will have differences amongst themselves, but we're talking about a general framework on how they derive rulings. In simple, what the Jumhur do, the three madhahib, what they do is, they get the ayat and ahadith, and when they put them all together, from there they deduce the rulings, and they deduce the principles. Right? So for example, they put all these ayat together, showing that whenever Allah commands something, the Sahaba did it straight away, and if they didn't do it straight away, the Prophet will tell them off, and so on. Therefore, the principle is that whenever a command comes, it shows obligation, and you have to do it straight away. Right? So that's a principle now in Usul al-Fiqh. The Hanafis will do the opposite. They will look at what the Shaykh said, and then they would make principles from that, and then whenever an ayah comes, they would use those, they will try to basically make the ayah work around whatever the Shaykh said, and that's how they derive their principles. So you can see the methodology is opposite. These are look at the ayah and hadith and then deduce their principles, and they look at what the Shaykh said, deduce their principles, and then try to apply that to ayat and hadith. Now there is going to be of overlap. Sometimes these do look at what the Imam said, hence why the madhahib differ, but generally that's the framework. Okay? And there are some other madhahib in Usul al-Fiqh as well, there's about 5 in total, but these are the main 2. The others are like, some combine between the 2 and some others, the minor ones, but these are the 2 main ones. These are the 2 main ones. Inshallah, maybe the next dawah we can do a bit of Usul al-Fiqh. We can go into it in more detail. But the point being now is that these principles now, anima ra'i or qiyas, is of two types. It can be praiseworthy, right? Like I just mentioned to you a principle that if a command comes in the legislation, what does it show? Obligation, and they have to do it straight away, right? That's a principle that's in line with the Quran and Sunnah. So therefore, if those principles are in line with the Quran and Sunnah and being derived from them, then that's good. Like the Qawaid Fiqhiyya, the 5 legal maxims which are agreed upon, and so on. But if they are principles that oppose the Quran and Sunnah, or are used to misinterpret the Quran and Sunnah, then that is what the Salaf now, and the narrations that Ibn Rajab is going to mention, that's what they are against. Does that make sense? So these principles of fiqh that I'm talking about, it's not every single principle. There are principles which are praiseworthy, and then there are principles which are dispraiseworthy. It's when it goes against the Quran and Sunnah, or it's used to misinterpret the Quran and Sunnah, or it's used to reject the Quran and Sunnah, that's when it becomes a problem. And this is where the problem of Zahib come in. When you ask somebody, why are you doing this? Right? Even though you may show them a hadith which is clear cut, and so on, right? Instead of saying, okay, I'll follow the Quran and Sunnah, or instead of saying, okay, maybe I'll look into it, the answer is, well, the madhab says it, so I have to do it. And not like a one-off. Sometimes a person may be confused, he may feel like he can't research, whatever, fair enough. But every time you come to him, the madhab, Hanbali madhab, then that becomes an issue. Why? The asl, what have you made now? The madhab. You've not qala Allah, qala Rasul. You made the issue your madhab. So some people ask, what's the ruling on studying a madhab and so on, right? There's 2 main ways of how to study fiqh. Either you do the tariqah of Ahl al-Hadith, which is that you go through the books of Hadith, and from there directly, you study obviously with the teacher, okay? And that has pros and it has cons. I'm not going to go into that right now. And the other way is that you study a madhab. The first way, more so the ulama Ahl al-Hadith in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, that's what they do. And the second way was more so the ulama in Saudi that we study with and so on, they would do. So both are fine. But the issue is if you study a madhab, that becomes your asl. Instead of it becoming a wasila, a means for you to understand the Quran and Sunnah and reach the destination, the issue is when that becomes your foundation. And then what happens is, because your love for the madhab, it overlaps into aqeedah, as we talked about the Hanabila, if you remember, right? And people say, well, this scholar from the Hanbali madhab, he believed it in doing tafweed of sifat, therefore it's fine, there's khilaf, and that's when all this batil comes in. Right? And also, another thing to remember as well, there's a difference between studying and acting upon. And studying a madhab is no problem. Right? But what you act upon, without a doubt, you act upon that which is in line with the Quran and Sunnah. If all you know is that madhab, and to you it seems like it's in line with the Quran and Sunnah, that's fine. That's all that's obligatory upon you, because that's all that you know. But if anything becomes clear, right, that it is going against the Quran and Sunnah, then without a doubt, then you don't follow that, and you follow that which is in line with the Quran and Sunnah. Now,
Is this one of the reasons why a lot of the Ahl al-Hadith in Pakistan
No, that's what so obviously with the ulama Ahl al-Hadith in the subcontinent, so they're a bit more stricter against madhabs, right? And the reason they're a bit more stricter is because of the fact that they have to deal with those Hanafis that have a lot of ta'assub. And we say Hanafis, not that we want to attack Hanafis, but because if you look at the reality, it's mostly them that cause the issues. Those that attended Sheikh Zafar's history of Islam in India last year, what did you hear? Somebody says Ameen out loud. What happens? They get knocked out and thrown out the masjid, thrown down the stairs, and they're about to get killed. That's what it leads to. Right? So they, for that reason, are a bit more strict against it. And then those in Saudi, because they don't have that issue as much, they're a bit more lenient, which is fine as well, because many of the ulama have Ibn Rajab, was it known as Ibn Rajab? Al-Hanbali. But at the same time, do you not see how he mentions aqwal of Salaf and ahadith, right? Does he just say, right, this is correct because Imam Ahmad said it and that's it? No, he brings adillah. No.
You said that studying is fine, but what about studying with Ahl Bidah?
That's a different issue. Study anything with Ahl Bidah is not allowed. Even Quran should not be studied with Ahl Bidah as a general principle. Why? Because it causes you to have a love for that person and think, oh, these guys are good, they come, they pray, mashallah, they pray more than some Salafis, and they're good, right? So that's the harm that comes out of it. No. Huh? Comparative fiqh is not for you beginners, any of you in this masjid right now, from what's apparent. Comparative fiqh is like the last stage. you need to know usul al-fiqh, you need to know Arabic language. For a person, now because of the internet, it becomes so easy for a person to say the Hanbali say this, Maliki say this, and what's correct is this. That's not how it works. We study Bidayat al-Mujtahid, which is a book of comparative fiqh. Comparative fiqh is difficult, and Sabab Khilaf, and understanding it properly, and understanding terminologies, and then each hadith that they use. Some people think they brought this one hadith. La. If you open the books of the Madhahib, they have tens of adillah. Even the Hanafis, we have to be just. It's not just like that. They do bring adillah, even though they may be weak, but you have to be just and read all of them, right? And then you have to be able to tasheeh of the hadith as well, right? If you never study Mustalah hadith, how are you gonna speak about it? And then there's a way to do it. You have to know where's ijma', where's the khilaf. That's called tahrim mahall al-niza'. And then you have to know the sabab khilaf, the reason why they differ, and then the usul al-fiqh principles pertaining to it. Then all of the adillah, and you have to read their books. If Ibn Uthaymeen says that the Hanafis say this, you can't rely upon that. You have to go to the Hanafi books and find their quotes from there, right? That's why if you were to just take, let's say, Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah's statement, and you used what he said, and you gave it as your master's thesis, it will not even be accepted, forget being marked. Right? The reality is that the level of knowledge when it comes to some youngsters thinking that they can speak about big issues, wallah, if you, whatever, most of these kids, if whatever they brought forth, if they wrote it down and gave it, and they submitted it, it would not even be accepted. The Shaykh would flick through it, laugh and said, what's this, and give it back. That happened to me once as well. In my first year in the Kulliyah Sharia, I wrote a 50-page essay on Raf' al-Yadayn, raising the hands. And I thought I did a sick job, 50 pages, Allah, alhamdulillah. For a first year student, took it, Shaykh Ishaqi, Allah, he's flicking through the pages, laughing, he's like, what's this, what's that? I've still got it upstairs. And then he just left, but now when I read it back, I realized, okay, yeah, this is not how you write it.
How does a beginner like us, how do we navigate between following a madhab, also not going against
No, of course. So obviously, you have to look at what becomes clear to you. If there is an issue where there's adillah on both sides, and there's ulama of Ahlul Sunnah on both sides, and la inkara fi masal ijtihad, and you don't refute and rebuke one another in those issues. But in those issues where you can clearly see that this goes against the Quran and Sunnah, or clearly there's no dalil for it, right? SubhanAllah, for example, one example comes to mind. It's not a proper example because there is hadith for it, but I just want to mention this particular reason they give. For example, whilst you're in the bathroom, you're not allowed to face the qibla facing forward or facing backwards. That comes in the hadith. Why is that? I remember in Rawd al-Murbi' they wrote the reason for it, lima fihi, and also you're not allowed to face the sun and moon. Why? Because they say, because lima fihima min nurillah, because in the sun and the moon is a light of Allah. What's so calamitous? In the sun and moon there's a light of Allah. That is not a dalil. So that comes because now they have to try to add extra stuff. But still, without a doubt, the ruling is still there. You should try not to face the qibla. And some ulama have said, no, the reason you shouldn't face the sun, like if you're in the desert, is because obviously then it makes you more exposed, the light's on you. Right? Try to go in shade where people can't see you and so on. Right, we're not going to finish the book. Let's carry on, inshallah. Just another point before we move on as well is وَيَنْبَغِي أَنْ يُعْلَمْ حَقِيقَةَ الْعَلَاقَ بَيْنَ الْعَقْلِ وَالنَّقْلِ. What's also important is you need to also know the relationship between the aql and the naql. Aql, our intellect, and the text. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has a very good book called Dar Ta'arud bil Aqli wal Naql. So removing the doubt of there being a contradiction between the aql and the naql. Okay? And this is a very advanced book. Now, in there he mentions, the summary is this one principle. Al-aql al-sarih la yukhalifu al-naql al-sahih. العقل الصريح لا يخالف النقل الصحيح. A authentic narration from the Quran and Sunnah cannot contradict the sound aql. Meaning whatever the Quran and Sunnah comes with, it does not go against sound logic or sound rationale or anything like that. If it does go against, if you feel like this doesn't make sense, then there's an issue in your aql or in your knowledge regarding the Quran and Sunnah. No. So, and you can read that in your own time, but that's basically a summary of what is talked about here. Now I'll give you a break inshallah until 1:15. You got a 7-minute break. بإذن الله تعالى. Until 1:15 inshallah we'll continue our 1:15. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. نعم يا أبو جميل تفضل. That's just wrong. يا أبا جميل because مضاف منصوب now. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So we're reading from page 39.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, debating about the religion. From amongst the matters rejected by the Imams of the Salaf was argumentation and disputation about issues concerning the lawful and prohibited. This was not the way of the Imams of Al-Islam. This was innovated later by the legal jurists of Kufa and Basra. For example, in their authoring works dealing with the differences amongst the Shafi'i and the Ahnaf, and then devoting a great deal of the time and energy in discussion and argumentation as to which stances were correct. Matters went on to such extreme that this became the limit of their knowledge. It preoccupied them and distracted them from beneficial knowledge. All of this is from newly invented matters.
So this is the fourth type of innovated science in the religion, which is debating all the time and arguing with falsehood. Meaning, what does that mean, arguing with falsehood? Is that either you're arguing, and first it's arguing, it's not debating, it's not discussion where you're trying to learn, right? So you are doing it either without knowledge. You're doing it without knowledge. Or you're doing it with incorrect intentions. Or, for example, you're trying to show off your knowledge or whatever the case may be. Or you're using it to cause fitna between people. Or you've made that your whole religion, all you do is just argue all the time. There's some people, anytime you meet them, they want to debate some issue. I've got one brother that had an issue in Ramadan. SubhanAllah, you know how the Salaf, 6 months after Ramadan, ask Allah to accept Ramadan. And for the next 6 months, ask Allah to allow him to reach Ramadan. This brother, for 6 months, reminisces about the debate we had in Ramadan. And for the next 6 months, he tells me to get ready for the debate in Ramadan. Allah musta'an, what sort of life what sort of manhaj of a Muslim is that? Right, that is something. And the debate is not something, it's not like about bid'ah and shirk or something like that. It's a fiqh issue where the ulama Ahl Sunnah have differed on, and there's a dillah on both sides. Right? So this is something which the ulama have warned against. The Salaf have warned against. And they mention this in their books, even in some of the Aqidah books. Leaving off al-jidal, wal-mira', wal-khusumat, and things similar to that. Because all that leads to evil things. It leads to, best case scenario, it leads to waste of time. And it causes a hardness of the heart. And it causes sometimes you to doubt things. And if you don't know the basics, all you're doing is debating all the time, that's how doubts come in. You have to have a foundation first. And when the brother asked about comparative fiqh, I was a bit harsh in my response. Reason being is because you find kids who don't even know Arabic, never study usul al-fiqh. If they have, it's like waraqat. What does waraqat mean? Who knows Arabic? It means pages. It's a small little, a few pages. Let's say, the whole book can fit in there. Yeah? A4 pages, it can fit in like 4 or 5. That's the waraqat. But then we study usul al-fiqh. Right? And then they want to debate. Shafi'i said this, Maliki said this, and what the rajih, the correct opinion. Imam Malik, he didn't get the correct opinion. Imam Shafi'i didn't get the correct opinion. You got the correct opinion. MashaAllah. Allahumma barak. Right? Which is dangerous. Yes, sometimes, it's clear they may have said something and they may have erred, but sometimes students make that there, in Arabic they say daydana, from like the word, like deen basically, 24/7, that's all that they're doing. That's something which is wrong. Comparative fiqh comes later on. For example, Ibn Qudama rahimahullah, he's made a manhaj. 4 books he's written. For the beginner, Umdatul Fiqh, where it's one opinion and you just learn everything, right? And then, after that, comes a book, Al-Muqni', where it's a bit bigger. So those that know the book Zad, it's a summary of Al-Muqni', where it's got two opinions of the madhab and a lot more detail, a lot more issues. Then he's got a book called Al-Kafi, where it's got everything the madhab says about fiqh. Then he's got Al-Mughni, 15 volumes or maybe more, comparative fiqh, what all the imams say. But where does that book come? The last level. Even in Medina University, the book that we studied was Bidayat al-Mujtahid, which is by Ibn Rushd, and it's comparative fiqh. And the reason they taught that is because normally those students that would go to Medina University would have studied their madhab from before, studied fiqh from before, and now they go and study comparative fiqh. But guess what happened? They changed it. Why? Because students were now going without studying from before. And that's not their level. So they changed it to Radd al-Murbi'. Now I've heard they're changing it back. The thing is in Medina, because it's international, because students from the whole world, the other benefit of Bidayat al-Mujtahid was no matter which country a person comes from, they would benefit from that book. Otherwise, if you limit to one madhab, he might be Hanafi, he might be this, and then it would cause issues for them. But the point being is always debating, especially when you're not qualified to do so, you don't know how to do so, and you make it your daydana. That is a problem. And if you look at the hadith, let's read the next paragraph.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, the Salaf rejected this, and there is a hadith recorded in the Sunan concerning this, in which the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, a nation never went astray after being guided except the means of disputation.
A nation never went astray after being guided except by means of disputation, arguing, al-jadal. And he recited the ayah.
Recited the ayah that they only say this to you for argument's sake. They are indeed a disputatious people.
What caused them to go astray? Just debating. That's not beneficial knowledge. That's a waste of time and a cause for your heart to become hardened. And it also then causes you to have to ta'assub to your opinion as well, because now you're just trying to force the other person to be content with what you're saying. And this is, subhanAllah, if you can link it to the previous point that we mentioned as well regarding the innovated principles by some of the madhahib, is that it then causes a person to cling on to anything that will aid them, even if the hadith is weak, even if the hadith is fabricated, or even the person himself might make up a hadith. Na'udhu billah. Right? And this actually deters people away from Islam. Because that's not Islam. Right now you might think, well, this khilafat, step back a bit. Is this what Islam came with, or did Islam come with Quran and Sunnah and following the Salaf? ليس كذلك? So, there's a story, some Mashaykh mentioned how there were some Japanese brothers who wanted to accept Islam. And as soon as they accepted Islam, the first question they were asked, right, which madhab are you going to follow? And you have to follow a madhab. Right? You have to choose right now. So what happened? They ran away, they never came back. So it's preventing people from entering into Islam. Yes, sometimes khilaf can take place, and if it's based upon dalil, with respect, with ihtiram, right, amongst ulama Ahl Sunnah themselves, then in one sense it's praiseworthy. Right? But the asl is that a person should stay away from it. That's why even books like Usul al-Sunnah by Ahmad, they'll mention it. Stay away from this debating without any benefit, debating just for the sake of debating without knowledge. Sometimes people will debate, right? But because they're not qualified to, it causes more harm, and it causes them to become more misguided. Now, we could move on to the next point. However, some of these aqwal the author is going to bring of the Salaf are very important. So please ponder over these aqwal. Now,
some of the Salaf said, when Allah desires good for His servant, He opens for him the door of action. When Allah desires evil for His servant, He locks the door of action and opens instead the door of disputation. Malik said,
Allah, ponder over that. If Allah wants good for a slave, Allah opens which door? The door of action. And if Allah wants evil for a slave, He closes the door of action. What does He open? The door of argumentation. So the person thinks, oh, I'm arguing about the religion, I'm defending the religion, but that is from shaitan, and that's actually an evil that you have fallen into. Now,
Al-Mu'allif rahimahullah ta'ala mentions Malik ibn Anas said that I've never met the inhabitants of this city and they used to abhor this excessiveness in which they find the people today.
يعني who are the inhabitants of Medina at the time? Tabi'een, Atba' Tabi'een, that he's referring to the Salaf. Saying that they weren't like this. Why? Because of the strength of their knowledge and the strength of their religion and of their aql as well. They knew that this is going to be a waste of time. This is why some of the ulama have said, من قل كلامه كثر دينه وعقله وعلمه. Whoever speech becomes less, then his knowledge, his religion and his aql strengthens and becomes more. ومن كثر كلامه ضعف دينه وعقله وعلمه. And whoever increases in speech, then his religion, his aql and his knowledge becomes weakened. And that's why, subhanAllah, you'll find that the Salaf spoke less. Right? Always looking at what they were saying. You know, even when you're arguing with someone, it gets heated, you say stuff that you regret. It's happened to me. I say stuff that you regret. At the time you think, I have to mention it. But subhanAllah, how many times has the religion come commanding us to protect our tongues? And the Salaf, they would be able to count from one Jum'ah to another Jum'ah what they would be saying. Why? Because you never know, one statement could lead you to the hellfire. The Prophet said in Bukhari, a person would utter a statement, لا يلقي لها بالا. He doesn't even think about it. You've said something, you've not thought about it again. It's like a joke, you've cracked it and you just moved on, like you've forgotten about it. But that one statement causes you to enter into the hellfire. And then the opposite, you may say a statement you've not thought about, but that causes you to enter into paradise. So that's how the Salaf were. They only speak with benefit. And that's why Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, كلام المتقدمين قليل فيه البركة. The speech of the earlier scholars was less, but there was barakah in there. وكلام المتأخرين كثير طويل. And the speech of the later scholars is a lot and lengthy. قليل البركة. It has only a very little amount of barakah within the... No.
Al-Mu'allif rahimahullah ta'ala, after explaining the statement of Imam Malik, he says, meaning delving into minute details of the issues and widening them. He used to censor excessive speech and legal verdicts, saying they speak as if they were lasphicus at camels, saying it is like this, it is like is this, it is like is that. Being reckless with their words, he used to abhor answering when faced with many questions and would say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Isra, they ask you about the soul, say the soul is my Lord's concern. And he would then not respond to the question.
And all these narrations about Imam Malik rahimahullah, that he asked about, when he's asked a lot of questions, he just wouldn't answer, he wouldn't like it. Right? And we know the famous story of when the man traveled from the other side of the world, other side of the dunya, just to ask him 40 questions. He only answered 6, and to the remaining 34 he said, I don't know. So the man said, I've come to the Imam of Medina, Imam of Dar al-Hijrah, and what do I say to my people when I go back? He said, get on your horse and go back and tell the people that Malik said he doesn't know. And look how much barakah there is in and the knowledge of Imam Malik rahimahullah. No.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, and he would then not respond to the question. It was asked a person who has knowledge of the Sunnah, should he argue in order to defend it? Should he argue in order to defend the Sunnah? He replied, no, he should inform the other of the Sunnah. If he accepts it, fine. Otherwise, he should remain silent. He would say arguing and disputing about knowledge.
So now, the next 3 statements that he mentions, the next 2 statements that he mentions 3 evil characteristics that come out, or evil effects that come out of falling into excessive argumentation without truth. No.
He mentions, he would then say arguing and disputing about knowledge.
By the way, we got another etiquette I need to add now. Okay, mashallah, you've perfected the other points. The other one now is that you, every time before you read, like if I explain and you read, right, before reading you make dua for the shaykh. Not me generally, but specifically, but generally whenever you read to a teacher, right? So you would say something like Ahsanallahu ilaykum, barakallahu fikum, jazakallahu khairan, whatever, any dua. Just say a dua and then you start reading. No.
Barakallahu fik. Barakallahu fik. قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, he would then say arguing and disputing about knowledge takes away the light of knowledge.
So number 1, it takes away the light of knowledge. No.
Barakallahu fik. And قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى then goes on to say, and disputing about knowledge hardens the heart and breeds cursing.
Number 2, it hardens the heart.
Barakallahu fikum.
And number 3,
I thought you finished. Sorry. Sorry about that.
number 3, نعم. Which page are we on in English?
41.
41.
Towards just before the statement.
نعم. 41.
Speaking about knowledge hardens the heart.
نعم. Hard and breeds cursing. ضغينة يعني cursing or hate. Hate might be a more clearer word. So what are the 3 things in these 2 statements of Maliki says that this argumentation causes? It takes away the nur, the light of knowledge, and it hardens the heart, and it causes hatred between people. Right? It might start off nice, so we had a good discussion. Yeah. The 3rd, 4th time, خلاص, you just at each other's throats. Huh? No.
جزاك الله خير. قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, then goes on to say, frequently what did he say in response to the question that he was asked, I do not know. And then he goes on to mention Imam Ahmad traversed the same path as followed by Malik in this.
So, yeah, I mentioned this hadith the Salaf were. And now Karen, read the next sentence as well.
There also occurs a prohibition concerning asking excessive questions, asking tricky and difficult questions, and also about events that have yet to occur.
So all of this is, part of, sometimes, here and there it may come out, which is fine, but some people love doing stuff like this, where they ask question after question after question, and they want to debate about it, and then they make up scenarios, okay, what if this happens, what if this happens? But what's happening in your life right now, you're not fulfilling the obligations, we're asking about this and that. The ulama, they prohibited this type of questioning. And as Imam Malik said, subhanAllah, the 3 things takes away the light of knowledge, causes hatred, and it hardens the heart. And this is very important. والشيخ عثيمين say in تعظيم العلم والعلم جوهر لطيف لا يصلح إلا للقلب النظيف. That knowledge is a precious jewel. لا يصلح إلا للقلب النظيف. It's not befitting to place it in anything apart from a clean, pure heart. So looking after the heart is something very important, right? You may seem like outwardly you're doing something beneficial, but inwardly you're just destroying your heart. And that, as we mentioned, the second part of the definition of beneficial knowledge that we gave in the first lesson, it doesn't fulfill that, it's destroying your heart. So it's actually harmful to you. No. The rest are just a number of other aqwal regarding this. We can go all the way to قد فتن كثير وزا page 44, halfway through, many of the later people.
Many of the later people have been tried with this, thinking that one who increases his words and arguments and disputes about matters of the religion is more knowledgeable than the one who does not. This is not but pure ignorance. Just look at the senior companions such as Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Mu'adh, Ibn Jabal, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with them all, Masud and Zayd ibn Thabit, may Allah be pleased with them. What was their state? Their words were less, and the words of Ibn Abbas yet had more knowledge than he. Similarly, the words of their successors were more than those of the companions, yet the latter had more knowledge than the former. The words of the next generation of the successors were more of those than the first generation successors, even though the latter knew more than the former. Therefore, knowledge is not narrating a great deal, nor is it having an opinion on everything. Rather, it is light which is implanted into the heart, by which the servant comes to understand the truth, employs it in differentiating between truth and falsehood, and is able to express the truth in brief, concise words. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was granted pithiness in speech, and his words were the most concise of words. All of this goes to show why there are prohibition against excessive speech and being loose in one's words.
Loose in one words, I don't know if that's the best translation. It says here, fil qila wa qal. Qila wa qal is he said, she said. Right? He said this, she said this. Right? She see. The seashells on the seashells. Right? But he will fall into that. What this Shaykh said this and this Shaykh this, and they use that to cause fitna between mashayikh and between Muslims and between students of knowledge. Sometimes a student of knowledge, mashallah, he's studying, he's got a manhaj, he's studying the books, he's memorizing, and then one day shaitan will come along. This Shaykh said this once, you can't take knowledge from him. And then what this Shaykh said this, and you become a fitna for him, and then this person stops studying altogether. And this person could have become the next Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, but you prevented him by your qila and qal. And there's many hadith Prophet ﷺ prohibited us from the exact wording of the hadith, qila wa qal. He said this, she said that. Anyways, the point now that the brother just read, Hamza, hafidhahullah, which is that after mentioning and prohibiting excessive argumentation specifically, Imam Rajab now moves on to, rahimahullah, a more general topic, which is speaking a lot. And mentioning how al-ibra laysa bi kathratil kalam, that somebody's knowledge is not measured by how much they're speaking. The more they speak doesn't mean that they have more knowledge. Alright, if you look at the last paragraph that we just read, the Prophet ﷺ was given Jami' al-Kalim, meaning few words, but vast in the meaning. Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يحدث حديثا لو عده العاد لأحصاه. The Prophet ﷺ would speak such a speech that if a person wanted to count the words that he said, they would be able to count them. That's how little they were. And we mentioned regarding the Salaf that they would be able to count the amount of words that they said from one Jum'ah to another Jum'ah, showing that they benefited this from the Prophet ﷺ and followed him in his footsteps. And why? This is due to the completeness of their knowledge and of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because as we mentioned just before, mentioning the Prophet ﷺ was given Jami' al-Kalim, that ilm is a nur, a light placed in the heart of a person. And speaking a lot takes away from that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن تَتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ فُرْقَانًا. If you have the taqwa of Allah, if your heart is full of taqwa, then Allah will make you a furqan, a criterion, i.e. a person who's able to differentiate between haqq and batil. Right? Allah didn't say, إِن تَتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ مَقَالًا. If you have taqwa of Allah, Allah will allow you to speak a lot. So you see, what's beneficial is not how much you speak, but rather it is whether what you are saying is beneficial or not, if it's sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. Otherwise, if you make this your criterion that whoever speaks more means that they have more knowledge, then what does that mean? That would necessitate that the later scholars are more knowledgeable than Salaf, and Atba' tabi'in are more knowledgeable than tabi'in, and tabi'in are more knowledgeable than Sahaba, and the Sahaba are more knowledgeable than the Prophet ﷺ. Na'udhu billahi min dhalik. The Prophet ﷺ spoke the least, and then as time went on, then started to speak more. And it's very sad to find that this is the mindset of many students. Just because somebody speaks more, right, they think they have more knowledge. But the nurturing teacher is the one who just gives the students what they need, not what they want. Yani, like I said to you, the fiqh book that we studied in Medina was Bidayat al-Mujtahid. In one semester, just in fiqh, we had different, each semester we had the number of sciences, like 7, 8 sciences, right? Fiqh, hadith, tafsir, and so on. Just in fiqh, we would study 150 masail, issues of khilaf. Then there were issues of ijma' as well, that was separate. Each of those 150 issues had khilaf. Sometimes 2 opinions, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, sometimes 7. And not just the four madhahib, the other ulama as well. And we have to remember the ijma' in that issue, where exactly the khilaf is, what the opinions were, who said what, and does the different imams have more than one narration regarding them. The Imam Ahmad sometimes had 3. And the 3 opinions, he would have 3 riwayat. Yani, so once he said this, once he said that, once he said that. Right? Then remembering the adillah, remember the authenticity of the hadith, remembering how to answer each of those adillah, right? And so on. So you imagine now, you do that for one issue. And khalas, you sit down, you understand that issue. Move on to the second issue. Khalas, you understand that issue. Move on to the third. By the time you reach the 5th, right, what was the first issue? I forgot. And that's actually what would happen. I would do 5 or 10 issues, Right, the first one, I don't know, I have to go back to it. So imagine now, so some people may say that, look, as you as a beginner, and we may take an issue in fiqh like we did in Durus Muhimma and so on. If I wanted to, I could speak about the whole issue for an hour, no problem. I'll pull out Mughni, I'll pull out my notes, and khas, we can speak about it. Whether you understand it, you don't understand it. Now, what's important is that I show that I have knowledge. Right? Do you benefit? You don't benefit. Do you remember what I said? You don't remember what I said. People love it. They think, oh, he spoke for half an hour. MashaAllah, barak. He went into detail. But that's not what's needed for the people. And that's the knowledge which will benefit them. So speaking a lot is never the criterion for who has more knowledge or who does not have more knowledge. And that's why Shaykh Usaymi, what does he say in Ta'zim al-Ilm? He says, قَلِيلٌ يَبْقَى فَيَنْفَعْ خَيْرٌ مِّن كَثِيرٍ يُلْقَى فَيُرْفَعْ. A little bit which remains and benefits the people is better than a lot which is thrown to a side and it is raised and forgotten about. Right? For example, how many times have you heard khutbahs? Okay, last week's khutbah, who can tell me what the khatib talked about? What was the khutbah? Friday? Allah barak, seeking knowledge, right? Right? But how many people remember? Sometimes you just, the next day, you ask them on Saturday, what was the khutbah about? They don't know. Salah just finished, what did the Imam recite in Salah? I don't have a clue. And it's not about, all this speaking a lot. If you remembered everything that was said in every khutbah you've heard, you'd be very knowledgeable. If you remembered every khutbah, as long as what the khatib is saying is correct, right, you would be very knowledgeable. But, especially khutbahs in the UK, half an hour long, quite long, right? You're not going to remember all of that. So you need to focus on that which is beneficial knowledge. And even I had a khutbah a few weeks ago regarding the danger of the tongue. And I mentioned a lot of hadith regarding how the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from speaking about so much. Even when Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, in the famous hadith, when he asked the Prophet ﷺ, what takes me closest to the paradise and furthest away from the hellfire? And he mentioned the 5 pillars of Islam and so many righteous actions. The Prophet himself at the end, he said, look, أَلَا أُخْبِرُكَ بِمِلَاكِ ذَلِكَ كُلِّهِ. Should I not inform you of that which summarizes everything that I've said? That if you cling on to this, everything else will be intact. And he said, كُفَّ عَلَيْكَ هَذَا. Grab this tongue, and he said, just imprison this tongue. So Mu'adh said, وَإِنَّ لَمُؤَاخَذُونَ بِمَا نَتَكَلَّمُ بِهِ. Are we going to be taken into account for that which we speak with? The Prophet said, ثَكِلَتْكَ أُمُّكَ يَا مُعَاذ. May your mother be lost of you. It's an Arab way of being surprised that how can you even ask such a question? وَهَلْ يَكُبُّ النَّاسَ فِي النَّارِ عَلَى وُجُوهِهِمْ وَعَلَى مَنَاخِرِهِمْ إِلَّا حَصَائِدُ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. Is it not the case that people will be thrown headfirst into the hellfire only due to what they said with their tongues? So that's why, subhanAllah, there's a hadith which this part of the topic will suffice for this, inshallah. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, it's hadith number 15 or 40, it's in Bukhari and Muslim, مَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. Whoever believes in Allah on the last day, whoever's a Muslim, either speak good or remain silent. If you're speaking, you're going to say something, there's going to be one of 3 options. Either what you're saying is something good, meaning there's more benefit than harm, or it is something bad, meaning there's more harm than benefit. So what's the ruling for the first one? If there's more benefit, speak. If there's more harm, then what? Remain silent. Okay, then we have a third one, which is where the harm and the benefit are the same, or you don't know, is it going to cause more harm or benefit? According to this hadith, the Prophet didn't give this third scenario. He just gave us 2. Speak good or remain silent. Meaning, if the benefits and harms are the same, or you don't know what the outcome is going to be, then what's the ruling? You remain silent. And going back to what is considered good speech, the ulama talk a lot about it. What I'll just mention is a small quick fa'idah mentioned by Al-Mawardi in his book Adab al-Dini wa Dunya. He mentioned conditions of when to speak. He mentioned 4 conditions of when to speak. He said, number 1, only speak when there is a need. Only speak when there is a need. If there's no need, don't speak. Because if there's no need, then you're not going to benefit anyone, and you're going to be accountable for those words that you say, and very easily you can fall into that which is displeasing to Allah. Number 2, speak with qadr al-haja, the amount which is needed. Speak for a need, and then the amount that you speak, keep it whatever the amount that you need. you need to tell somebody, look, please don't do this in the masjid. Please pick up your water bottle. Right? Or all the brothers who are staying in the back room who have left all their water bottles, please pick them up, because if I see them afterwards, I'm going to tell you off. Right? That's double meaning. It's an example, and I'm telling you guys as well. Apparently, there's a lot of water bottles in the back room. So make sure you pick them up. Right? Now, imagine now, I stop this dars, and I do give you a half-an-hour lecture just on a water bottle. Right? Right? You're going to be like, right, 2 minutes is fine, 3 minutes is fine. We've got the point. Anything more? Right? There's no need. In fact, it could be the opposite. Sometimes you advise someone. Sometimes all a person needs is one sentence. Right? But please don't do it. It's against the rules. They say, oh, I didn't know. Jazakallah khair. Khalas. Sometimes you go overboard and the guy's going to be like, bro, I get it. Khalas. Yani, you know, and then he gets angry and then you fall into another mushkila, another problem. Number 3. Speak in the correct time and place. The correct time and place. Right? For example, 12 o'clock at night, don't start asking questions. Right? When it's time to sleep. Or if you see him eating, or you see that he's busy, he's got family waiting for him, he needs to go for a doctor's appointment. Khlas, you wait, you ask later. Right? You find the right appropriate time. You see that it's angry, leave it, ask later, and so on. And number 4 is that you choose the words that you choose the words carefully that you use. So maybe what you're saying is correct, but maybe the way you're saying it is incorrect. Look at the book of Shaykh Muhammadi Masjid. How does it start? I'lam rahimakallah. No, may Allah have mercy upon you. May Allah bless you. May Allah guide you to that which pleases Him, and so on. And you start with making dua, and you smile, and you say nice words. Khlas, that softens the person to listen to you, right? But if you just come along and be like, bid'ah man, you can't do that, right? And even something like that, there are people who are worse, right? For example, some brothers in Medina, and if they find out, khalas, you go to a certain masjid, or if your thawb is a bit lower than the shin, even if it doesn't go the ankle, look how you don't give you salam, nothing. And if they speak to you, it's very harsh. Akhi, don't you not know that's a sunnah? And who's going to listen to a person speaking like that? Right? So there's a way of speaking as well. And I'll finish with a statement of Hamdun al-Qassar, where he was asked, Ma balu salafi anfa'u min kalamina. Why is it that the speech of the Salaf is more beneficial than our speech? Why is it that the speech of the Salaf is more beneficial than our speech? He said, لِأَنَّهُمْ تَكَلَّمُوا لِعِزِّ الْإِسْلَامِ, because they spoke for honor of Islam. وَرِضَى الرَّحْمَنِ, and for the pleasure of Allah. وَنَحْنُ نَتَكَلَّمُ, and we speak لِعِزِّ النُّفُوسِ, for honor of ourselves. وَطَلَبِ الدُّنْيَا, and to attain something from the dunya. وَرِضَى الْخَلْقِ, and to please the creation. So what did he say? Because the Salaf, لِأَنَّهُمْ تَكَلَّمُوا لِعِزِّ الْإِسْلَامِ وَرِضَى الرَّحْمَنِ, because they spoke for honor of Islam and the pleasure of Ar-Rahman. وَنَحْنُ نَتَكَلَّمُ, whilst we speak for لِعِزِّ النَّفْس or nufus, for honor of ourselves. وَطَلَبِ الدُّنْيَا, and to attain something from the dunya. وَرِضَى الْخَلْقِ, and to please the creation. So therefore, the summary of this point here is we need to make sure that when we speak, it's something beneficial and something good, and not just speak for the sake of speaking, because speaking a lot doesn't necessarily mean that because you've spoken a lot, you have more knowledge. And if you look at even contemporary examples, look at Ibn Baz rahimahullah. You look at someone's fatwa, 53 seconds, right? 2 minutes max, 3. I don't think I've seen more than 3 minutes. Even his books, very, very small, quick explanations. And only recently his Sharh Bulugh al-Maram came out, which is about a month ago, which is voluminous. Other than that, his books normally are very, very short. Likewise, look at Shaykh Salih Fawzan, hafidhahullah, his fatwa, 30-second video on YouTube, and that's it. Right? Now every scholar is different. Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah, he couldn't summarize. He just had to go and give you all the detail. Right? But now do we say, right, he's more knowledgeable because he spoke longer? No. We do not say that. So if you keep going on, then for the next few pages, that's what Ibn Rajab rahimahullah, he expands on this issue. Now, You can read at any own time. However, I want you to read from now. It's page 49 halfway through.
جزاك الله خير وبارك الله فيك. قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, the best of what exists with regards to the science of
exegesis يعني تفسير.
exegesis of the Quran, جزاك الله خير, of the Quran, explanation of the hadith and discussion of the lawful and prohibited is with that which is related from the companions, the successors and the following generations until the generation of the famous imams we have previously referred to.
Now, subhanAllah, we come to the next part of the book, which is, what's the next part of the book, who remembers? Just before what is beneficial knowledge? The best sciences. Right? Now there's one science he's not mentioned from Innovated Sciences. Tasawwuf, he's going to mention that a bit later, so the tartib is a bit. But this, he talks now about the best sciences. Now, there's something that I wanted to mention regarding this issue of the best sciences, right? Because it's this question which is asked a lot: which science is the best? Now, I wanted to give a proper academic answer to this, right? And I know it's late, so I don't think it's the best time to mention an academic answer, but Labas will mention it because of time restraint. Whenever you are talking about which is the best science, or even when we're talking about it here, the first point is that we have to realize there's a difference between maqam al-fadl and maqam al-tafdil. Between establishing a virtue for a science and saying which is better. Right? So, in this discussion, if we say one science is better than another science, we are not degrading another science. Okay, so keep that in mind. So, for example, if I was to say hadith is better than fiqh, if I was, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if I was to say that, that does not mean I'm degrading the importance of fiqh. Understood? And if somebody does do that, then that's a deficiency in them, and that's something wrong that they are doing, and it's something that Sheikh Salih al-Usaymi speaks about in his book, Ta'zim al-Ilm as well. That's the first point. Now the second point is that whenever you want to compare between sciences and say which one's better, which one's more virtuous, there are a number of things to remember. Firstly, that saying which science is better is qadiyya murakkabah. It's a compound issue. What do you mean by compound? Meaning there's different angles you have to look at it from. There's different factors that have to be taken into consideration. For example, one thing you have to look at is the subject matter. What are you talking about? Are you talking about Allah, or the speech of Allah, or the speech of the Prophet ﷺ, and so on? Right? Or even in normal sciences, from the sciences which have a very important subject matter, medicine, because the subject matter is how to cure your body to keep you alive. Staying alive is important, right? So khalas, it shows the importance of it. Another angle that you could look at is the objective. Another angle that you can look at is the need of the people for it. And something might be beneficial, but no one needs it. And some Arabic poetry and so on, it's beautiful, it's very interesting, and it's beneficial. It might help a mujtahid in understanding some hadith and so on. The general person, if he doesn't know how to pray, or if he's doing shirk and kufr, he doesn't need poetry. He needs to rectify his salah and his aqeedah. Another angle is the principles that science is based upon. That's also another angle that you could look at it from. And there are other angles that you can look at it from as well. So therefore, you have to be very careful which angle or which factors you take into consideration before giving a ruling on which is the best science. Number two, there's a difference between at-tafdeel al-mutlaq wa at-tafdeel al-nisbi. Saying that this science is better objectively and saying that this is subjectively better. Meaning, even if I turn around and say that this science is better objectively, right? I say aqeedah is the most important. Now, subjectively for a certain person or for a certain time and place, it could be that another science is more important. For example, right, we say aqeedah more generally, but right now, something which is widespread, right, everyone's talking about in the masjid, is that they all have doubt regarding the preservation of the Quran. Right? So we need to go into ulum al-Quran now. So right now, we need to sort out this issue because it's affecting everyone. Right? So right now, what's more important is that we're going to have a dars on ulum al-Quran, sciences of the Quran, rather than aqeedah. Or for example, I walk in and none of you guys know how to pray. Right? We're doing a fiqh lesson instead of aqeedah. Okay? And number three, there's a difference between a general tafdeel, and generally saying this is better, and a detailed form of saying this is better. Meaning, if I was to say this science is better than another science, then it doesn't mean that every single issue in that science is better than every single issue in another science. There could be, for example, if you were to say Aqidah is better than fiqh, and there's some issues in Aqidah which are secondary. The person differs in, it's not a big issue. But there are some issues in fiqh, if a person doesn't know, that's more important than that secondary issue in Aqidah. If he's doing something which causes his salah to be batil, then without a doubt he needs to rectify that. And that's more important. Does that make sense? Everyone with me? Yeah? Right. And just to summarize, and each scholar, whichever field he specializes in, will say that his field is the best, right? But generally, taking these principles into account, we could say that Aqidah is the most important, right? Because if you look at it from the different angles, in terms of the subject matter, it's talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-ilmu al-a'la, al-ilmu bil-a'la. The highest knowledge is knowledge of the highest. Number two, even in terms of the adilla which are used, the proofs that are used, you don't accept weak hadith or our aql or qiyas. It's based upon authentically narrated strong proofs and adillah. Number three, the objective that comes behind it as well. The objective is what? The objective is for a person to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and attain paradise. Because without tawheed, you can't enter into paradise. If you have an issue in fiqh, it's not the same as an issue in aqidah. And you're in shirk, you're not entering paradise. You did a sin, right? Or you did something haram, or you did a transaction in a certain way, and you'll be sinful, but it don't take you out of the fold of Islam, generally. Number four, the need of the people. The people are in need of them rectifying their beliefs and taking them out of the shirk and the innovations that they are in. And also another angle as well, which is the effect that Aqidah has on the other sciences. So many times principles in other sciences are based upon the Aqidah. In Usul al-Fiqh, the Asha'ira Maturidiyya will place some principles. Why? Because it aids their madhab. Likewise, they even do that in Arabic language. They might bring a principle in the Arabic language and say this word means this. But in reality, that's not precise. But they've mentioned that principle. Why? Because when it comes to applying it to an ayah in the Quran, right, they'll use that principle to say, look, it proves our madhab. So ala kulli hal, that was a quick summary. I tried to summarize it regarding that issue. So if you come back to Ibn Rajab rahimahullah, he says, he speaks about it a bit differently. He doesn't give like one particular science, but he now talks about what is the sources of all these sciences, what's most beneficial, and he mentions that it is what has been narrated from the Sahaba and Tabi'een and Atba'a Tabi'een. What the Salaf were upon. So in each science, in Aqidah, what's the most beneficial way to understand Aqidah? The Quran and Sunnah with the understanding of the Salaf of the Ummah. Fiqh, following the madhab of the Salaf. Arabic, again, madhab of the Salaf, not what the later scholars came and innovated from their principles and so on. So that's a summary of what he says. Later on, there's a statement of al-Za'i you might want to read, if you page 50 at the bottom.
جزاك الله خير وبارك الله فيك. قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, Al-Za'i said, knowledge is that which the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam conveyed. Anything else is not to be considered knowledge. This was also stated by Imam Ahmed.
So knowledge is what the companions of the Prophet ﷺ came with. Anything else is not knowledge. Imam Ahmed said?
Imam Ahmed, and he said concerning the successors, you are free to choose. Meaning it's up to you if you choose to record their words or leave them.
So when it came to the Sahaba, then their statements are a dalil, which is write down in themselves. That's the issue in Usul al-Fiqh. If Sahabi says something, is it a dalil? And the summary is a dalil, as long as it doesn't go against the Quran and Sunnah, and he doesn't go against another Sahabi. And Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, he has another condition, saying that he's from the ulama of the Sahaba. Afterwards, we don't have time for questions now. Now, that's regarding the Sahaba. Okay? So like, if fiqh issue came, can we use a statement of Sahaba to prove it? No. As for the Tabi'een, are their statements adillah? No, their statements aren't. If they all agree upon something, yes, that comes under the madhab of the Salaf that we're talking about. But what we're talking about here is one statement of one companion, or one Tabi'i. Is the statement of a Tabi'i dalil in of itself? No. With the Sahabi, there is khilaf. Some ulama differ, some say yeah, some for some certain Sahaba and some for not. It's a very long discussion. But Tabi'een is not a dalil. Okay? So that's why he says you have a choice to whether write it down or not. Meaning, still when tabi'in comes, you want to write it, not write it. It's up to you. However, carry on.
However, Imam al-Zuhri used to write the narrations of Salih ibn Qasayn, disagreed with him only on this, only to later regret that himself never wrote them.
So he said Imam al-Zuhri was somebody who would write down what the tabi'in said. But another person called Salih ibn Kaysan, he did not write them down. And then he regretted not writing it down. So the statements of tabi'in are still important. May not be a dalil, but it's important so that you get an understanding of what the understanding of the Salaf was. Right? Now.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, in our times it is imperative to use the words of the Imams of the Salaf, who are followed upon in the times of Shafi and Ahmed, Ishaq and Abu Ubaid, be written down. Let the people be aware. Let the people be aware of those affairs that happened after them, for many few matters occurred, amongst which the appearance of those who attributed themselves to following the Sunnah and the Hadith, such as the Zahriya and their likes. The Zahriya often The Zahiriya often oppose the Sunnah due to their founders. Deviation from the stances held by the Imams and following his own understanding or his taking to the text that the Imams before him did not take to. As for delving into the words of the speculative theologians.
So this paragraph that I just read, the author now, he mentions some things that we should stay away from. So within these sciences, when we cling on to the Quran and Sunnah with understanding of the Salaf of the Ummah, there are a number of things that we should stay away from. And what he mentions in this, he's talking about the Zahiriya. The Zahiriya are those people that take the apparent meanings only. They reject qiyas generally. Okay? They reject qiyas, even though the main two Imams is Ibn Hazm and Dawood al-Zahiri. Dawood al-Zahiri came first from the time of the Salaf. He rejected partially qiyas. Qiyas is different types. Qiyas jali, qiyas khafi. He accepted qiyas jali, rejected khafi. Ibn Hazm rejected it totally, even though the ulama say, even though he rejected it, sometimes he would still act upon it but call it something else, because sometimes you have to. But ala kulli hal, sometimes, just because we say we stick to the Quran and Sunnah, it doesn't mean that, we don't ever use our intellect, we don't ever use the other narrations, we don't look at the principles, we don't look at the context, right? Where sometimes there can be an exception to the rule, or sometimes we can interpret it to mean something else if there's a dalil to show, and the Arabic language proves that. It can happen sometimes. Now it's a mistake that if every single time all you do is take the apparent meaning, that's the asl. But then you say, no, the apparent meaning, whatever it says, that's the exact meaning, and we're not going to turn away from that no matter what. And that is also something the author is warning us from. Saying that, look, you have to also understand the text with the principles that the ulama Ahlul Sunnah have placed, and understanding the objective and of the Sharia, maqash Sharia, and other things as well, and not to be hasty and just saying that's the wording and just act upon it as well, right? And there's different rulings pertaining to that. And now there's another thing he's going to tell us to stay away from. No.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى, as for delving into the words of the speculative theologians and philosophers, this is pure evil. Rare is it to find one who delves into them without being sullied by some of their filth. Imam Ahmed said none delves into speculative theology, kalam, except that he takes on board the ways of the Jahm. He, as well as the other Imams of the Salaf, used to warn the people against speculative theology, Ahlul Kalam, even if their intention was to defend the Sunnah.
So here another thing we should stay away from is rhetoric and philosophy and ilm al-kalam generally. A lot of students ask, what is ilm al-kalam? The knowledge of kalam. Ilm al-kalam is very hard to give it a one-word translation. And it does overlap with philosophy and a few other things. But generally what it is these logical principles that Ahlul Bid'ah have placed themselves so that they can misinterpret the text and reject the Sunnah from its apparent meaning and so on. Like some of the examples we gave why they reject sifat, right? Or we reject Allah loving and Allah being pleased. Why? Because it shows that He has to have a shu'ur, He has to have feelings, and the feelings, where the feeling has to take place in the heart, and these things we can't have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so therefore we have to reject it. All this kalam, right? So this is what the Salaf told us to stay away from. Because it's not narrated by the Sahaba, Tabi'in, Atba' Tabi'in, and even it's not even the way they're doing it is not narrated, nor is the conclusion that they come to been narrated from them as well. The Shaykh is telling us to stay away from ilm al-kalam. And ilm al-kalam, sometimes Ahl bid'ah use it as a synonym for aqidah. Right? So their aqidah, sometimes they call it they call it ilm al-kalam. Aqidah, they call it ilm al-kalam. No, you, Hamza, you read it. You stay. Ilm al-kalam, what did I say? Ilm al-kalam, it's principles Ahl bid'ah have placed from their own logic and intellect to reject or misinterpret the text. Okay? And sometimes they use it as a synonym for aqidah because their aqidah is based upon ilmu al-kalam. And this is why the Salaf, right, they were very, very severe and strict against listening to anyone from Ahl al-Bid'ah. Because they try to make their own logical arguments, inshallah, give us 2-3 minutes, we'll stop, inshallah. Then, sometimes some people may think, because they try to make it logical, they may end up accepting it. So the ulama, the Salaf are very, very strict from listening to even a word from Ahl al-Bid'ah. So for example, it's narrated in Ash-Shari'a by Al-Ajurri, where somebody from People Innovation came to Ayyub al-Sikhtiyani, and he said, I want to ask you about something. Ayyub al-Sikhtiyani, he took his finger and he said, Wala nisfi kalima, not even half a word am I going to listen to you. And likewise, we had Tawus, where a man came to him and did something similar. Tawus told his son, put your fingers in your ear, أدخل أصبعيك في أذنيك, put your fingers in your ear, واشدد لا تسمع من كلامه شيئا, and don't just like put it against the ear, like put it into your ear properly, and don't even listen to a word that this person is saying. Why? Because the narrator, he says, يعني أن القلب ضعيف, and the hearts are weak. You don't know what doubt can come and penetrate into your heart, causing deviances to take place. Imam Shafi'i said, حكمي في أهل الكلام, my ruling pertaining to people of kalam, those that are going to rhetoric and all these issues, أن يضربوا بالجريد والنعال, is that these people be punished by being hit with sandals and with different things and sticks and so on. ويطاف بهم في العشائر والقبائل, and then you take these people on a show throughout the different villages and the different tribes. ويقال هذا جزاء من ترك الكتاب والسنة وأقبل على الكلام, and a person shouts that this is the outcome of the one who leaves of the Quran and Sunnah, and he goes to ilm al-kalam, trying to understand the religion with his own intellect. Now, here we'll stop, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, we have taken most of the book. We only have about how many pages before it finishes? 75. We have 20 pages left, right? Which we can finish tomorrow, inshallah. We have finished this section on the best science, and you can read that. We just have that one science left from the Innovated Sciences with Tasawwuf, which he talks about quickly, which we can quickly talk about, inshallah. And then after that, he talks about beneficial knowledge, and then the rest of the book is quite straightforward to understand, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So hopefully tomorrow, bi'idhnillah, we will finish the book. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us beneficial knowledge. Before I finish, who had that question? Yeah, what was your question? No. It shows that it was an important question if you forgot.
I was serious when I said that. Should we say Ameen when the person says that?
Yeah, you can say Ameen. No. You can say every time. You had a different question though. You put your hand up after that. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك جزاك الله خير.